Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Murphy. I am the creator of the Positivity Patrol, and I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, in the central United States, in the Midwest, in the breadbasket. And I'm here today to talk to you about the lost art and skill of diplomacy and why that is important. It's a core value skill that I think all of us should have at our fingertips, and we need to be able to use it more effectively in our interpersonal relationships. And I'll tell you why. I think a lot of life has just become too confrontational, and we've lost our ability to effectively communicate because we are not listening to each other at a very deep level. And so it creates a situation of just having people reacting to what's being said and things like that, and really not thinking before we act, failing to pause and reflect. So before we get into too deep into what diplomacy is and how to use it, we need to talk about what is diplomacy. And dictionaries could have definitions, and I really didn't look those up. I'm basing my definition on my experience as an attorney for the past 22 years, as an individual that's been a peacemaker and has made that a big part of my life and relationships that I have. And I'm really trying to make communications more effective and to use the diplomatic skill in order to do that. So as far as I'm concerned, diplomacy is it is included within the definition are these items: tact or tactfulness. Sometimes we're too direct and too confrontational. We might overplay our hand, and that can backfire. That can backfire. You can have a situation where people will take things the wrong way, and sometimes it's better to be a little bit more subtle and indirect. Not entirely, but I'll talk about how we can wrap some of the messages we have to deliver into diplomacy to make sure they're better received. Listening is a difficult skill that I think a lot of us have lost the ability to utilize. Sometimes we're just listening to respond. We're not thinking about what the other person is saying and trying to interpret it. Or we get caught up in trying to read between the lines too much and not just accepting what the person is telling us at face value. So that's one of the challenges I have as an attorney. We've been trained to read between the lines, and sometimes we forget that we need to deal with the words at face value and interpret those also, and not just reading between the lines and looking for the hidden or subliminal meaning in everything. Another aspect of diplomacy is restating, reaffirming. If someone says something, for example, we can say, what I hear you saying is this. By saying A, are you really saying B? Or are you saying A leads to B? Is that a reasonable conclusion? In other words, it's trying to sort of color in the aspects of what the person is saying. If the individual we're listening to or speaking with is saying something, perhaps by doing this restating, slight reframing, we're sort of coloring in the outline of what we're looking at to get a clearer picture of what the individual is saying. Another important aspect of diplomacy is negotiating. And we as attorneys frequently have opportunities to broker deals, to settle agreements. We talk about cutting deals, to settle cases, to put disputes behind us. And I think a lot of times, many of us that are skilled at diplomacy, we find that we're putting out fires a lot. If this is really a core part of your personality, and it is for me, I find that a lot of times I'm asked to deal with difficult situations, to resolve conflicts, to find ways to diminish conflict, and at least get people to listen to each other sufficiently so that perhaps you can reach an agreement, or at least an understanding, to have more productive relationships and to not have this stuck feeling or the feeling of constantly being in conflict with each other. So the aspect of negotiation is very important. And in doing that, you have to be shrewd about who you're representing, what your interests are, whether you're neutral or not. Sometimes those of us called upon to be diplomatic are called to be neutral third parties. And I think sometimes we have to deal with subjective issues we might have with that might bias our the way we look at something or how we handle a situation. So sometimes we have to leave our internal biases at the door when we're stepping into this diplomatic capacity. There's an issue of bridging gaps. You have people in discussions frequently will be at odds with each other. There will be an impasse at times. You will see a vast crevice between the two parties, or more than two parties. You could have a multitude of parties, and there could be a vast canyon of unknown factors between them. And it would be up to the diplomat in the situation to figure out, what do the parties have in common? How can they work together? How can they better understand each other? How can they more effectively communicate, including listening, hearing out all parties, letting everyone put their opinion on the table to be considered, and really look at facts. Sometimes being diplomatic means you're trying to get back to the facts and trying to get people to distance themselves from their opinion to some degree, so you can at least find a way to try to reach an agreement. So, but one of the key things with being diplomatic or having diplomacy is seeking commonality, seeking common interests, common concerns, uniting factors. I think in a lot of conflicts we find that there's disunity and discord, and we're looking for the ability to harmonize those interests and to bring them together in some way, so you're not having a constant shouting match that has become all too common these days. We see a lot of unnecessary fights and arguments, and it's extremely important to remember that you don't need to attend every argument you're invited to. This is extremely difficult to me as an attorney. Sometimes we like to be argumentative, we like to be right, we'd like to have the last word, but we have to let all that go. If we live our lives that way with our families and our friends, we're going to have a lot of sour relationships, and we're going to have a lot of mending fences to do later, and there just simply aren't enough bandages to heal all those relationships. And so we need to find ways to keep those relationships as solid as we can. So if we're having to do repairs, that we're doing them on a minor basis and not having to do major wrapping of bandages to keep a relationship together. Another thing with commonality, I would mention, sometimes agreement can't be reached. We can try to reach agreement, and sometimes that's not possible. And so at points like that, perhaps it's productive to say, we agreed to disagree on these points. We agreed to agree on these 3 points, but we agreed to disagree on these 3 perhaps more minor points. And just the fact that you're able to agree that you disagree about some things, it doesn't sound like much, but it is still an agreement. As the uniting factors that are out there, but we need to recognize that there are differences that can't be resolved in every case, and at least give the parties an opportunity to disagree on certain things, to stick by principles and not force people to compromise if they're not willing or unable to do so. There's another aspect of diplomacy that involves, I would call it a kind, gentle strength. Kindness is something that intersects with diplomacy. I think you have to proceed with kindness. You have to have some degree of gentility. You can't be too tough, abrasive, and confrontational, or you're just simply not going to be an effective diplomat. I think of ambassadors in international relations, and if I had to have another career, perhaps this might be one. I discovered in law school I was really fond of international law, and so we dealt with a lot of issues involving international law that might be resolved by treaties, negotiations where ambassadors would be involved between different countries and trying to resolve conflicts either directly through diplomatic relations or perhaps through the United Nations or some other entity or some fictional entity. Some of these situations were made up, fictional hypotheticals that law students would deal with. So, but that's the type of thing that an effective diplomat would sort of be like someone, maybe not exactly Henry Kissinger, but that might be the best person I could point to when I think of this, what Kissinger did with the United States and China in going back and forth between the two parties and interests, trying to arrange things to allow President Nixon at the time to visit China. That was a huge opportunity for both countries to better understand each other, work on international trade and things of that nature. And there are just a lot of things that happen with countries trying to understand each other. You have to look at common interests. You have to look at history, the governing principles. Each side might have different marching orders. And I think we find that a lot of times in relationships, the parties might have different marching orders, different boundaries that they can't cross. And people that are involved in diplomacy need to recognize that, respect those boundaries, and still try to find a way to resolve differences and prevent conflict to the extent possible. And in some cases, you have to litigate. You have to go to court. So another aspect here's an interesting aspect of diplomacy, and actually this is a parenting tactic. And I was home over the weekend talking to my sister, and she told me about a very interesting parenting tactic that I think relates to diplomacy. And I hadn't really thought about it in this way, but I'll describe it. It's called the sweet, sour, sweet approach. And so what a parent might do, if there's an issue a parent has to resolve with a child, a parent might say, I'm so proud of you that you cleaned up your room, and we're proud you've become a beautiful young lady. And then you move on to the sour part, and the parent might say, but you've, and maybe you don't want to use the word but. Some references with diplomacy recommend that we take that word out of the dictionary, so be careful with that. Also the word however, which is another legalese term that perhaps may or may not be effective in this. But at least with a child, a parent could say, we would really like you to work on cleaning up your room a little more. You've left your clothes on the floor and perhaps some food and dishes that should be cleaned up. We've asked you to do a couple things. Could you work a little harder on that? And then a parent would move on to the sweet part and say, we're really looking forward to seeing what you grow up to do in your future, in your career. You have some very exciting possibilities, and we're really excited to experience those with you and to help you. So essentially, you've wrapped the child's messiness or the inability to clean up within two sweet things. And hopefully the child will either remember the first thing you said or the last thing you said. But you do want the child to absorb the message of clean up your room, take the dishes to the kitchen, etc. So, a person exercising diplomacy in the workplace, something that's become all too common is people losing their jobs. Management has had downsizing and things like that. So in that type of situation, a human resources manager might say, start a conversation with an employee and say, look, we want to thank you for your contributions. You've done a lot of great, valuable things here. Unfortunately, and this is the sour part, we've been forced to eliminate your position. And then moving on to the sweet part and saying, but we'd like to help you with your transition to future employment in this way. And we have some people that will help you with finding a job, perhaps retraining, getting your resume out to key people that you may not have contact with, that perhaps our personnel office does. So you see, this is a way that human resources people have been trained to wrap the sour news of essentially you've been fired or you lost your job, but to wrap it in the context of you did a good job here and thank you, with here are the transitional ways we want to help you, so that eventually that employee will realize that A, he or she did a good job, and B, that there is help available. Although, unfortunately, a lot of people in that situation, they remember the sour part. They remember the part of losing their job and not so much the sweetness on both sides. So it becomes it's a sandwich approach. You wrap the sour part between the sweet parts, and so you're cushioning the blow, and then you're moving on to the issue of conflict, and then you're moving back to maybe some point of commonality. So that could be worked into a legal negotiation context in that way. So how can we use, let me mention with international relations, frequently we have peace treaties that resolve wars and situations. I will tell you as attorneys, sometimes we feel that there are situations that do not appear that they can be settled, period. They're just too much conflict. The parties hate each other too much. They're not listening to each other. Sometimes it takes a lot of self-control on the part of the attorneys to be able to continue to negotiate in those situations. But in a lot of cases, wars have been resolved by peace treaties where the right people stepped in or said the right words, or someone heard the offer of peace, was heard by the correct ears, or said the right way, so that it ended a major war, perhaps a 100 years war. There have been wars that have lasted a long time, obviously, in history. So keep that in mind. There are peacekeeping elements of diplomacy that I'll talk about a little later in this discussion. How can we use diplomacy to improve our interpersonal relationships? Well, if it's bad news, you try to cushion the blow in some way. Sometimes if you're too direct, it's not considered to be diplomatic. And I'll give you an example. Let's say hypothetically that someone tells you you need to change your attitude. Pretty direct. Perhaps too direct for some people. Even though that statement may be true and it may be factual, but to the receiver, to the recipient, that is going to be interpreted as hostile, provocative, confrontational, and some people it's going to make very angry. So perhaps that's the right message, but I'm not sure it's the right way to deliver it to everyone. So here's an example of how that could be, that message could be delivered in a better way, in a more diplomatic way. So perhaps the individual would say this instead: "You did this well, thanks," just referring to anything in the past. "We noticed your attitude has shifted. Is everything okay? How can we help you? Is there anything we can do?" So that the problem with this direct approach with "you need to change your attitude" is that the person, the recipient, has to want or desire to change their attitude. And if that person doesn't want to do so and isn't ready, isn't receptive to that message, that forceful approach is going to backfire. It could destroy that relationship. It could put that person in it could wreck the friendship. It's just a very difficult way to put something. Some people are good at being direct. Some people are better at being tactful, careful, more mindful of what the consequences might be of saying something quite that direct. And sometimes if you're going to say something that direct, you might ask for permission. In the military, there's a tradition with, I can't remember exactly how it's phrased, but asking for permission to tell a commanding officer that something is wrong and trying to propose a way to fix it in a productive way that's not construed destructively. So I think we need to ask ourselves, is it really constructive to tell someone, you need to change your attitude, and to put it in that tone of voice? And there's a difference between that and perhaps diplomatically saying, you need to change your attitude in a calmer way, and perhaps say it slower. You need to change your attitude. And if you almost whisper it, it just has a completely different meaning. But if it's yelled at somebody or with someone raising their voice, it's going to be construed much differently. So be very careful with the tone of voice, with how direct you are. And I think we need to be very conscious about what our intent is in having these conversations. We don't want to try to harm people. There's too much destruction going on. There's not enough construction of working together cooperatively to build healthy, strong relationships. So think about that. Let's see, we talked about cushioning the blow. Soften your approach with subtlety. The example I gave you here with the shifting the way the attitude problem was identified, the hypothetical attitude problem, that would be one way to do that, just to make it a little subtle and to keep the door open and offer to help the person. A lot of times people will take things the wrong way because they see us as being the bad guy or gal, and they don't know that we're perhaps there to help. And if we tell them we're there to help, or ask them, how can I help? And we're serious about that, and we're serious about it with the tone of our voice, I think that message will be received much differently. And that person might actually do something much differently with that message than if it's too direct, too confrontational, just delivered the wrong way. Perhaps the right message, but perhaps the wrong delivery. We need to find ways with diplomacy to make both sides happy. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes to have a more productive relationship, sometimes it's not always possible to find those, but certainly look for them. And sometimes you can keep track of those. You can say, well, party A wants this, and so we'll give party A a couple of concessions in the agreement. Party B wants these other things, so we'll include those within the agreement as well. And sometimes that helps build a foundation for reaching an agreement. If you have some foundational concessions and have those identified early on, and sometimes it takes a lot of shuttle diplomacy going back and forth between the parties to find some agreement there. Not always possible to do it. So, but keep working it and make sure you try to keep both sides happy if possible. I do want to mention before I forget, I gave a couple references in the comments to prefatory diplomatic materials. There was an article in the Dale Carnegie blog that I thought was very helpful. They had 6 rules of communicating with diplomacy and tact. I think tactfulness is something that a lot of people have lost the ability to do. I've experienced this in my life all the time. There are people that they don't have it. And I try to tell them kindly and gently, perhaps there's a better way to deliver that message. I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. But perhaps if you say this more tactfully, maybe the recipient will receive that message better. And in a lot of cases, I'm sometimes the one that's found to try to reframe the way of delivering that message in such a way that the recipient will actually receive it, understand it, and act upon it. So check out that article on the Dale Carnegie blog. I left a link there in the comments. Also, there were WikiHow has 8 tips on how to be diplomatic, and pretty good advice. Not sure I agree with all their suggestions, but I think a lot of them were helpful. And then they have some tips at the end also. So check on that at your leisure, and I think you might find those to be helpful as well. Okay, so with being a diplomat, a person who is asked to be diplomatic, or a person that has it as part of their core, I mean, for me, this is a part of my personality. And it's a core part of my personality, to the extent that it's perhaps one of the top 10 core values that I have. And I would have trouble replacing it with another value, because if there were, I just can't think of something else to put in its place that might be quite as important. It might not be in the top 5, but I think it's probably in the top 10. But an important aspect of being diplomatic is to be a peacemaker. And a lot of times this involves extending an olive branch when you don't know how the other party is going to receive it. To be the peaceful dove in the room with hawks who are intended to have other intentions and perhaps have a conflict or war or a lawsuit. And that's just not always in everyone's best interest. Sometimes it's better to settle a dispute, to find a way to resolve it peacefully. And I think, generally speaking, I think there are too many arguments. I think it's productive to argue for argument's sake, and I would have to say that as an attorney, because I think that develops our critical thinking skills. But I think a lot of the arguments we have with each other are silly. We're arguing over whether someone is right or wrong, and if so, how. And we're all keeping score in our relationships to try to make sure we get the last word, and one-upping each other, and just taking shots at each other verbally when we shouldn't be. I think we should be extending the olive branch of peacefulness and forgiveness to each other more, and serve in a peacekeeping role. And I'd be curious to see if a lot of us would do that and unite the world with that, to see what would happen. Now, the Bible says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And as a believer in God and someone who thinks that peacemaking is important, I really believe that that beatitude is important, and that it needs to be kept in mind. And that's kind of one of those centering Bible verses in my life that helps lead and guide me, providing a pathway for my conduct, and really knowing what's important to me, what I really intend to keep as my primary path. So let's see. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the value of compromise. Sometimes we need to ask, can both sides give a little? Sometimes it's possible to compromise, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes it takes a skilled diplomat to determine if compromise is possible, and if so, to what extent. And if that compromise doesn't occur, to figure out how to how to capture that in a different way, how to recharacterize it, how to reframe it. Sometimes there might be compromise or settlement agreements that fly around to try to resolve a dispute. And but I look for compromise and try to make it part of your diplomatic path. I've become fascinated with a lot of us live lives of aggression, and then there are a lot of other people that live lives of pacifism, that perhaps are too passive. And I'm looking for something in the middle. I'm looking for the diplomatic path that can weave perhaps assertiveness with a little bit of kindness and gentility, to wrap those together in kind of a middle way. That would be the path that I would seek with the theory of diplomacy, the diplomatic path that I'm trying to pursue. With the value of compromise, trying to see if both sides can give a little. You want to see if both parties can meet in the middle. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you have to test the middle, move it to the right, move it to the left, move it up and down, see if that makes a difference. Sometimes if something is reframed in tiny ways, for some people it'll make a difference. For others, there's just a matter of principle, and some will not. If they're important principles, perhaps people shouldn't compromise on those. But if they're insignificant issues, I think a lot of times we can find value in compromising in the middle. And so that aspect of diplomacy is very valuable. I think it's helpful with being diplomatic to not assume or presume anything. This is very difficult to do. And there's the saying, if I assume something, it makes an ass out of you and me. And of course, perhaps it makes more of an ass out of me than you, I'm not sure it puts that in the correct order, but the point is, if you assume things, you're going to get things wrong. And people are going to take that the wrong way, and they're going to think that you did that intentionally. And there are just so many, you can think 5, 6 layers of consequences beyond that, and realize that, that may be an incorrect thing to do, incorrect way to handle things. It can create more conflict. So be very careful about that. Try not to presume or assume anything. And know that misunderstandings will creep in and pull the rug from underneath diplomatic negotiations at times, especially if you play this assumption or presumption game. Perhaps the one presumption you could make might be one that's shared by our legal system, to presume that everyone's innocent until proven guilty. I think if we act that way in our relationships, we're going to have more healthy, strong relationships and better communications. It's when we assume or presume that people are guilty until they're proven innocent. I mean, that's when then we're putting up walls or barriers that are going to be really hard to break down. And so keep that in mind. We need to find ways to remove those assumptions and presumptions that really serve more as barriers, as walls that separate us instead of unite us. And really the purpose of a diplomat, of a peacemaker, if you will, would be to try to reach an agreement, perhaps more times than not. Maybe not always, but in a lot of cases, it is definitely something that is possible and optimal. Sometimes it's the optimal, maximal, best result for both sides is something that the person that's diplomatic will put on the table, or the person that is diplomatic will be the one writing the agreement that the parties agree to. So I would say think like an ambassador. We talked about Ambassador Kissinger as Secretary of State, shuttling all over the world, especially with China, to build diplomatic relations, to deal with issues with Taiwan, to deal with international trade, to deal with human rights. There are just all kinds of issues that he was called upon to deal with Nixon's visit to China. So when I think of an ambassador, I think of Kissinger. I think there have been few people as skilled as he was. And I don't know if that he's just the type of person. There probably will never be someone like that again. And we all need to recognize that. We're all so unique. There will never be someone as diplomatic as you in your own special way. And I think because of that's really a strength. And if it is a strength, it should be flexed. It should be used to the fullest capacity because we have limited time. And that, I think if you're one of those people who, like me, has found this to be a strength, find ways to flex it. Find ways to teach it to others. Find ways to use it in your relationships. Improve your communication skills. Improve your networking ability. It can have such a powerful impact on your life if you take this seriously. It also creates it really creates sort of a magnetic connection to people that I think if you lack this ability, if you lack this strength, you're just not going to have the same connection with people. I think people that are diplomatic have a deeper connection with people in some ways, because they're seen as the people behind the scenes that everybody may not be aware of exactly what they're doing, but they see the results. And a lot of times they know the results were achieved with the use of that person's diplomatic ability, their strength, their uniqueness. So reflect on that yourself. Think about how you can flex your diplomatic ability, strength, and teach it to others, and really use it in such a way to revolutionize the way you live. Because once you take this path, it's really hard to go back. In fact, I don't think there is any going back. If you pursue this, you're a diplomat for life. So if you're thinking like an ambassador, you want to find commonalities somewhere among the parties and build from that. So you're building a foundation brick by brick. You find bricks, you find mortar, You put those together, and you try to find ways to keep that cement intact. I really think of a diplomat as it's like the glue that holds together a model airplane. In model airplanes, there are other parts that are connected by things other than glue, but I put together some of those when I was young, and the glue was what held it together. And so the diplomat in a lot of relationships is the person finding ways to cement the parties together, either with cement, with glue, with aspects of commonality, with a settlement agreement. In some cases, you need a formal written agreement. With others, a handshake will do. It just kind of depends on the situation and how serious the conflict is that the diplomat is dealing. It's key in these diplomatic situations. You don't want to take sides too soon. You really don't want to take sides too soon. So it's tempting to do that at times. You have a situation where you hear something and you immediately think, I'm on this side. I can't possibly go to the other side. I don't even want to hear what the other side is saying. And I think when we do that, we slam the door on what diplomacy, what path it can unlock. So I try not to take sides too soon. We want to wait. We want to absorb information like a sponge. And then when we have all the facts, and I'm talking about facts, not opinions. Opinions are helpful, but the facts might be the key things that the diplomat needs to reach agreements. So once all the facts are on the table, that is the proper time to try to take a side or to frame the argument and get the two sides or more than two sides to look at what each other are saying. I want to welcome Ha Tran. Thanks for joining me. I see you joined me here. Just talking about diplomacy, the lost art and skill, and how we can rediscover it, recapture it, how we can flex our diplomatic muscles. I think one thing I would mention with not taking sides too soon, I try to get people to give the facts first, and I try to get them to keep the situation of the facts. If I notice they're gravitating towards opinion as an attorney or a person in a diplomatic situation, I redirect the parties to the facts. And I say, look, these are the facts as you've outlined them, and these are the facts as someone else has outlined them. And if it gets into opinions, we have to identify those as opinions because a lot of parties are so glued to their glued to where they are, they don't realize that what they're stating as facts are really opinions. So it's helpful to sort that out and to not jump to conclusions prematurely, to hear both sides out, or more than both sides. If there's, you can have 5 or 6 parties to a dispute or more if you have a more complicated situation. So, but try to wait until you have all the facts on the table before taking sides, and perhaps you don't want to take sides at all. If you're the third party middleman, you have to try to be neutral. And I think that neutrality is really tough to achieve, tough to maintain. People talk about the neutrality of Switzerland during some of the world wars, and I know people can debate how neutral that neutrality was, but they at least tried to maintain that type of neutrality. And in some cases, neutrality is helpful. In other cases, it is not. Sometimes we'll have situations where, one side may have good or evil intentions, and the other side may have the opposite. And in that type of situation, neutrality may not be an option at all. I think we have to recognize some people may not have the best of intentions, and if they do have evil, malevolent intentions, we need to be able to stand up to that and stop it. So one thing I would mention with something that doesn't blend well with diplomacy is aggression and overreaction. If we're going to be diplomatic, we have to be able to press the pause button. We have to be able to set aggression aside, to really be more assertive than aggressive. And instead of reacting, to just be acting and not responding without overreacting out of proportion to what's said or what happened. So try to keep the aggression and overreaction off the table. One thing that we're trained as attorneys is to prepare for the best case scenario and to always prepare for the worst case scenario. And so this is kind of a two different ways of dealing with the maxim of expect the unexpected. And that way you're not going to be a surprise. You tend not to overreact if you've thought through some of these negative things that could occur. And if something positive happens, you're not going to blow that out of proportion and ruin chances of a diplomatic agreement. Sometimes people will get too excited, too exuberant after something good happens, and then realize there may be further facts on the table that may cause them to temper their enthusiasm. So sometimes it's helpful to be more stoic in how you react to something that's good. You want to make sure that you absorb it fully first, and that you're not making your jubilance or exuberance, a disadvantage in dealing with the other party in a diplomatic sense. So just be careful with that. Some people think if you get too jubilant, too exuberant, they think you're gloating, you're showing off, you're taking advantage of the situation, and we just have to be really careful with that. People construe that and maybe not construe it in the way you intended. So be careful. People are always watching and listening to us and interpreting what we're saying and doing or not doing. And we do need to pay attention to really what the parties are not doing and not saying in a diplomatic situation. That we pay so much attention to what parties are saying and doing and reading between the lines, and we don't think about what are they not saying and what are they not doing. And so sometimes it's helpful to say, what I hear you saying is this. And so you're not saying this, this, and this, to rule those possibilities out, to get them off the table. Sometimes it's helpful to really frame the debate and the dispute and know what the boundaries are. And if we rule out the things that are not happening and not being said, not intended, it frames the dispute in a better way, in a more fruitful way, in a clearer way. It gives some clarity to the diplomatic discussion. And I think it gives you really a better chance of being productive if you're restating and reframing what the parties are saying, and make sure you understand what they're intending, what the boundaries are, and how far what they're saying goes, what the limits are. And I think if we ask intelligent questions, we will learn what those limits are. We will learn what's off the table. We will learn what's on the table. But we need to know the outline of the table to figure out what agreement could be reached between parties. The next thing I'm going to talk about, as a dog owner, I think of sometimes dog analogies that are helpful to these discussions. So I would say you want to try to pacify or comfort what I would call the barking dog. And the barking dog would be someone who is complaining, yelling, screaming. They want you to fix everything. I've had people in my life that have asked me to fix the unfixable situation. There are situations that cannot be solved by anyone on earth. I'm convinced. There are situations that can only be solved perhaps by less than 10 people on the earth, depending on what the issue is. But we need to recognize we all have limits. And if we're being asked to fix the unfixable situation, we have to find a way to pacify or comfort that barking dog. We have to find something like the human equivalent of a dog toy, a dog bone, a concession, a platitude, perhaps a compliment. As long as the person's going to be open to that and you can be sincere about what you're saying. I don't think we want to get into the situation of false platitudes or anything like that, but I think it is helpful to be complimentary and really to try to remove the animosity from the person in a very careful way, get them back to the point of being calm. And if you can achieve that, then I think you can help that person much better. And it's just so many of the people that are dealing with us as coaches, as attorneys. A lot of people are in that situation. They're barking dogs. They want someone to listen to them. They want the hand holding, but they want something else. And then sometimes they want us to be the aggressive ones, to take out their anger on someone else or to get revenge or something like that. And we need to help them recognize that getting revenge and responding in kind to people in sort of an abrasive, bombastic manner, in my opinion, is counterproductive. And if that's what I'm being asked to do, I'm not your person to help you. If that's your intention, that is not what I want to be doing. I want to help people move on, let go of what you can let go of, and to find ways to really have a more calm demeanor, to live life in more of a go with the flow approach, and to not be rocked all over the waves. Some people live their lives, and perhaps I've been guilty of this in the past too, where you have things go wrong, and every little wave we treat it like a shipwreck, and it's not. There are times where we have chaotic, catastrophic things happen, but we need to recognize that they're not all shipwrecks. And so we need to get clients and people that we help to recognize that this is just a bump in the road. There are ways we can work around this. We don't always have to go through the problem. Sometimes we can go around it. Sometimes we can go behind it. Sometimes we just go a completely different direction. And every time a door closes, there are other doors open. And sometimes the other doors open are much more exciting than the doors that closed. And we just need to recognize that. And I think if we do recognize that, and we can convince people of that I would call the barking dogs, we will find that many more people become more like the quiet, sleepy dog on the couch, instead of the angry barking dog that wants you to drop everything now, make him or her happy, and to take out your anger on someone else. That's just not a productive way to live. We need to live in a more calm, determined way, really more of a reflective. If we reflect on what we're doing and what we're saying, we're going to respond to that barking dog scenario a lot better. And then every barking dog we encounter, sometimes we don't even hear the barking, because we realize that this person is just blowing off steam. So I'm going to let him or her do that to some extent, to a limited extent, as long as they're not taking it out on me. I mean, if it becomes personal, then you've got a different situation, and then we all have our protective shields up. And I think we have to. We do have to protect ourselves and look out for ourselves, but we need to recognize that the barking dog scenario is something we're going to run into a lot. And how we respond to that may determine the outcome of the rest of our life. It may determine which direction we go, may determine which friendships or relationships we have, who we can help as coaches or attorneys. And, sometimes the person just needs someone else to help them. And we need to recognize that. They're ideal attorneys and coaches for certain people. They're less than ideal attorneys and coaches for some people. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right person to help you with your problem or issue or challenge that you're facing. But I think if we look at the barking dog analogy, I think we can deal with a lot of people that we view as being too abrasive, too hostile, too confrontational. If we kind of see them in that light, I think it helps us deal with it better. And again, I'm speaking as a dog owner. If you own a cat, I'm sorry, cats don't really have a cat analogy for you. Cats don't really bark. So, and I actually am allergic to cats, and now I'm really digressing from the topic here, but recognize the barking dog scenario is something you'll run into. Find ways to deflect it. Confrontational people that will, be angry at you for whatever reason, and sometimes it just you're the person there who happens to be listening, and we just have to let it go. We just have to completely let it go. We can't let it bother us. We all have to have a tough exterior, be resilient. And I think resiliency is a huge part of being an effective diplomat. if you can have a thick skin or thicken your skin, you can be much more effective in diplomatically dealing with people and situations. And you just get to a point where things don't really bother you. They might bother you a little, and you might get tiny bit upset about something, and then it'll just pass. And you'll see other people overreacting the same thing, and people look at things differently. If you recognize sometimes that we've overreacted, we realize we need to slow down, calm down, keep calm, and deal with things from more of a calm, relaxed, stoic approach. So let's see. Another important thing with diplomacy, with being diplomatic, is listening to people, hearing them out completely. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you feel. Following up, not cutting people off. We all want to be heard, but sometimes we want to be heard at a deep level, but we want to understand people at a very shallow level. And if we're just willing to listen this much, how can we expect people to listen this much? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, we have to listen at an abundant level to get people to listen to us. And if we develop that capacity where people realize that we are effective listeners, receptive, open, reflective, analytical to the extent that we're not going to overreact to something before we fully understand it, testing what someone's saying to make sure that we fully understand them with the restating that we talked about. But if we listen to people at a deep level and hear them out completely, that just completely changes everything. I mean, it's the difference between not being heard at all and being heard at a very deep level. If you're listening to people at a very deep level, they're going to listen to you, and they're going to tell their friends, and they're going to tell their family, and suddenly you're going to have all kinds of people that want to listen to you that you don't even know from all over the world. And I'm just telling you, as someone who has tested this a little bit, I mean, if we're selfish and we don't want to listen to people, and we say we don't have time for them, and we'll give them 17 words to respond to something, and then we give them 400 words back on something else. I mean, they're not going to listen to 400 words. They're going to listen to the first 17, and then they're going to start tuning us out. So, I mean, part of this is we need to kind of stop keeping score on, I listened to you for this amount of time, so you should listen to me for that amount of time. We need to put the timer away. We need to recognize that we're all here for a specific purpose. Some of us are here because let's face it, because we're fantastic listeners, because we have that capacity, because we have that receptivity, and that can be taught to others. And if it is taught to others, people will become better listeners, deeper listeners, more thoughtful, analytical, better critical thinkers, but in a good way, in a thoughtful way, not in a self-critical or critical of others way. I want to be careful with that, because a lot of people have gotten into self-criticism or criticism of others, and that gets taken the wrong way, even when it has good intentions. Just remember, there's a difference between constructive criticism and destructive criticism. And this is a huge issue for anyone who is intending to be diplomatic. You have to draw the line and say, I'll only go so far. I can only be constructively critical of someone to this extent. And if I don't want them to be destructively critical of me, I'm not going to cross that line. I just will not do it. If you do it, you're going to find that people will destructively criticize you. And then you have, then we're all just firing shots at each other. And what's the point of having a relationship if that's what we're doing? I mean, we have to recognize that we all have, we're all sensitive about criticism. We all want to be right. We all want to have the last word. We all want to be appreciated, loved, recognized for our own unique greatness. But in order to do that, we have to treat other people with that degree of respect, love, appreciation, gratitude, and thankfulness. We have to provide all of those. So we talked about listening. To listen at a deeper capacity, don't interrupt people. This will shock everyone. We have a society where everyone interrupts everyone else. No one really cares whose turn it is to talk, unless it's a time political debate, and even then the rules get bent on that. So that's not even a good example. But you have shows on TV where the modus operandi, where the way of operating is to interrupt each other and cut each other off. And this is difficult and challenging for attorneys. We like to interrupt each other. We like to tell each other that we're wrong, and this is why. We're not even going to let people finish their sentences. Why do we not want people to finish their sentences? I'm very uncomfortable with having incomplete thoughts, with having people cut me off, so I try very hard not to cut them off. And if I do recognize I've interrupted someone, I drop it, or someone will tell me. Perhaps my wife or someone else will say, "Oh no, you interrupted me," and I go back to silence. I mean, that's more productive than trying to get the last word and cut off every sentence, complete every sentence. Although we have to recognize, as a married couple, a lot of times husbands and wives will complete each other's sentences, and the best friends will do that too. You're so close to the same wavelength that you will complete each other's sentences. So, but there's a difference between that and interrupting and cutting each other off and really not caring what the other person thinks. So we need to recognize that. We need to make that a part of just allowing everyone to be heard, to make sure that they're finished to the extent that they can be, and understanding what they're saying. And so sometimes that means asking, "Are you saying this?" When someone explains what they're saying. So think about that. Ask yourself, am I interrupting people? And if I am, why? And what effect is that having on my relationships? Look at your relationships and see if you're having difficulty with communications, with understanding each other, if perhaps part of the issue is just kind of a lack of listening for when someone is finished speaking. And understanding that, in certain relationships, it's very common, to politely finish someone's sentence if they can't think of the right word or something like that. I mean, there's a helpfulness to that. You remember the word that they're thinking of because you're on the same wavelength. I mean, that's a helpful form of interrupting. But cutting people off with a hostile, confrontational, oppositional response to what they're saying, I mean, that's something quite different. That's something we need to completely let go of. I mean, unless it's a debate, and I would grant you in a debate, it may be polite, helpful to do that if you're trying to win the debate. But is that all we care about? Do we just care about winning? And this is a tough thing for attorneys to deal with. We're in the courtroom. We're trained to cut people off. We're trained to interrupt. If we don't interrupt, we could lose the case. And so I want to be very careful about this, because if attorneys hear this and don't hear me give that kind of caveat, I'm going to have a problem with millions of attorneys around the world. So recognize that in your work situation, there may be situations where you have to do that. But in your interpersonal relationships and the way we deal with people on a normal basis, that's just not productive. It's not helpful. And unless we're providing the ending of a sentence in a helpful way, it's going too far, in my opinion, and really ruining your chance of being a diplomatic listener at a deep level. It just would put you more at a basic level of diplomacy that I think that's where most people find they're stuck at. There are very few people that achieve true mastery of this art or skill, which if you're really good at it, there is a degree of mastery. It is not a basic skill where you inherit this ability. I think you inherit a little bit of it, perhaps from your parents and peers, friends, etc. But I think of a lot of it is learned. It's not all innate. It has to be learned. So, but if we're going to be diplomatic at a deep level, we have to be able to listen at a deep level and to do all these other things that we're talking about. Let's see. Oh, if diplomacy is part of your personality, a core part of your personality, like it is for me, you want to keep it, strengthen it, flex it, use it in a productive way, not use it in a destructive way. A lot of people might have diplomatic ability and might use it in a negative construct, to be destructively critical of people. But I think if you're looking at diplomacy at a deep level, I just don't see a lot of people that are that destructive. If that's a centering force and a core value, perhaps one of the top 10 core values in my life, I would truly be lost without it. I wouldn't be able to communicate with people as effectively. And I think it's partly why I've just found so many people that I'm able to effectively communicate with around the world. Anyway, that's what I would say on that. If it's part of your personality, strengthen it, flex it, use it, and try to get others to do the same. So let's see. Oh, the comments are working. I tried to respond to you earlier, and it wouldn't take my comment, and now it did. So I talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the blab. So it's good to see that's back. Thank you. So the last thing I would say with diplomacy, diplomacy is the glue. It's like the glue in the model airplane that holds everything together. It's the mortar between the bricks and the foundation of the house or the building. So recognize that if you have that ability, you have to have that stick-to-itiveness to allow those bricks to stick together. You have to hold the bricks together. You have to hold the model airplane together. You have to hold the relationships together that are on the rocks that you're being asked to come in and fix, to provide a remedy. Maybe not a cure is perhaps a bad word for it, but to at least be able to provide a solution and to patch up relationships, to make them more productive, helpful, and fruitful. So if you can recognize that diplomacy is the glue, you find that it can be very helpful and effective. It can change your relationships. It can change your life. It can change the lives of countless others. It can change the path of history. If you recognize your own uniqueness, your ability to be diplomatic, and to help restore this lost art and skill to its proper place at the table, at the centerpiece of our lives, diplomacy is part of my soul, I believe, and it's part of yours. So try to find a way to find it, rediscover it. Sometimes we have to redefine it and make sure that it's positive. We want to have it aligned with positivity, and positivity is a big deal to me as the creator of the Positivity Patrol. So try to make sure that you have this as part of your way that you operate, the important values that you have in your life. And I think you'll find that this is an important one. And although it's fallen out of favor recently with society becoming more confrontational, more hostile, more distracted, less listening, I would like to see us get back to a deeper level of listening, going with the flow, putting diplomacy where it belongs, front and center, guiding our path of our lives. So thank you for joining me today. This is Jeremy Murphy. I am a life coach. I'm creator of the Positivity Patrol. You can find the Positivity Patrol at positivitypatrol.com. I will type it into the chat here so that you have reference to it. And if you are looking for a life coach, please contact me. I'm happy to help people in person or through virtual connections. Happy to help in any way. I also have 22 years legal experience as an attorney, so I have a strong legal background. I'm also a running coach. I blog at runninggrooveshark.com. If you want to read my running blog, happy to help with people who are runners or looking to improve their running, help with customizing training, deal with injuries, things of that nature. So I can also be found at Jeremy Murphy on Twitter is my Twitter handle. But again, this is Jeremy Murphy signing off. Thank you for joining us to talk about the lost art and skill of diplomacy. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I know I have. And I really look forward to meeting more people around the world who want to take this issue seriously, really be able to strengthen our diplomatic abilities and to make it a part of our future. It's important to us to live this in our lives, to teach it to our children, to make sure that our children know how to do this, to help our friends and family be able to have more productive, healthy, strong relationships. And if we take diplomacy seriously and make it a centering principle, a centering core value, we can have an amazing future, an amazing path, and just much more effective, healthy, strong relationships. So once again, thanks again for joining me. Look forward to discussing diplomacy at a deeper level. Probably be teaching this as kind of a sort of a mastery level down the road. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. But this is an issue I will be dealing with in teaching my life coaching clients and also people that I deal with in my interpersonal relationships, trying to make people more effective communicators. Really, in order to do that, we have to be able to step into the shoes of a diplomat, an ambassador, and to try to shuttle back and forth between the parties, understand where they are, respect their principles, reach an agreement when we can, and recognize that not every dispute can be solved, but we'll solve as many as we can. And don't attend every argument you're invited to, just the ones that are important and significant to you. So have an awesome day. Thanks for joining me. Jeremy Murphy, creator of the Positivity Patrol, signing off. Thanks for joining us for this discussion of diplomacy. It's sort of a diplomacy 101. It'll be a more advanced discussion later.